Hi guys, it's Eric from Sideboard MTG, and I've got the newest list of undefeated decks for you guys today. If you want to check them out for yourself, the link is in the description box below. It's the first link. And the second link will take you to Mana Traders, where you can rent all of these decks to play in your competitive standard leagues for Magic Online. If you use the coupon code SideboardMTGWhite, you'll save 15% when you sign up. Okay, so 44 decks here, guys. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to be going over these really quick. Now, for those of you that want to kind of skip through this video or even watch it on speeds of like 1.5 or 2 even, be careful. I'm going to be talking very fast. And the rest of it is... it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to be doing these by color. So if you want to like skip through the video, then once you find your color, then you can kind of narrow it down from there. So let's go ahead and get started with the decks that are not on TCG Player. And this first one here is a Boros Ascend deck. The reason I'm calling it a Boros Ascend deck is because it does have some Ascend features here with Snubhorn Sentry and Pride of Conquerors. And then it wants to kind of go wide using Legion Warboss along with its early drops like Legion's Landing. Sky March or Aspirant also cares about Ascend, so it can get up in the air. It's not really hard for this deck to get Ascend because by the time you've got into turn 5, you probably have about 5 permanents out. And then once you get the City's Blessing, you're kind of good from there. History of Benalia putting out multiple tokens. Heroic Reinforcements also putting out multiple tokens. And then you have Venerated Loxodon to be like a lord for all of these small guys that you're putting out. Once you start swinging in and going wide, casting cards like Pride of Conquerors, it doesn't take long to just really overtake the board. Now, in the sideboard, this deck does have more copies of Conclave Tribunal, which seems to be a pretty reasonable go-to, along with Citywide Bust, because you're normally going to have all the smallest creatures, and Citywide Bust is going to help you deal with the bigger ones. Sheltering Light, just another way to protect your creatures. Think of it as a blossoming defense or something for your creatures against non-exile removal. And then, of course, an extra copy of Adanto's Vanguard. And I know some of you guys are really excited about this one. There is a copy of Chance for Glory in this deck. There's a couple copies here in the sideboard, along with some Response and Resurgence. So that is your Boros Ascend deck. Next, we're going to talk about the Boros Mentor deck, which is pretty cool. This is a version of Mentor, and we're going to see other versions of Mentor decks, but this one in particular is aggro in the main board using only 2 copies of Swiftblade Vindicator and 3 copies of Tajik, along with History of Benalia, which is, kind of what we've grown used to in the past week here. Knights of Grace, Dauntless Bodyguard to protect, your important mentor creatures. Dauntless Bodyguard allowing you to give Indestructible to one of the creatures that you're swinging in with so that you can at least get those +1/+1 counters on it. Now, you will notice that there are 2 copies of a Johnny, Adversary of Tyrants in this deck, allowing you to pump up those creatures and get more +1/+1 counters due to your mentor effects. Now, Aurelia also works very good at that, but we already knew that. Now, what's crazy about this deck and what I absolutely love about it is in the sideboard, you'll see a couple more angels, which kind of allows it to shift into that Boros Angels deck. I really like this game plan. We see that a lot with the mono red decks and things of that nature, where they're really fast and aggressive in game 1, but then in game 2 they can remove some of their easier to remove Swiftblade Vindicators and maybe some Boros Challengers to bring in much larger, hardier creatures. Normally this is done when you're playing against decks that have spot removal, and you're not going to be able to get a lot of synergy based off of your creatures, and you want each individual creature to have much more impact on the game. So it does have that ability to kind of jump up from your Boros Aggro, Boros Mentor into a Boros Angels deck. And I really like that about this deck. hate that it wasn't posted on TCG Player. Now, this next one is the UB Control deck. This was also played by Lagzilla, who played the UB Control deck from last week. Now, we'll see that he has actually, dropped a Deadweight and a couple of Ravenous Chupacabras for a full playset of mainboard Ritual of Soot. Now, we're still seeing the disinformation campaign and the thought seizures that he was running last week, and I do want to say that he's done very well with this deck, and we are seeing multiple variants of it. So it seems that Lagzilla is updating this deck and continuing to win with it. So we'll see here that he also put in a couple mainboard copies of Eldest Reborn, which happens to be one of your best plays to follow up a on the draw Ritual of Soot. On the draw, if you follow up with a Eldest Reborn and kill whatever their play was to follow up from your Ritual of the Soot, then you're going to just completely take over the game. And then, of course, if you're on the play, you're going to get their 4-drop. It's still very, very good. But on the play, I think Doom Whisperer is still gonna be the card to play here. Now, in the sideboard, we're not seeing a lot of changes. Just more Eldest Reborn, Thief of Sanity, and couple extra board wipes to get those really small things. Tokens has been fairly large over the past week. So it makes sense that we see, some more ways to deal with tokens and more 2-for-1s out of Lagzilla here. So congratulations, man, on keeping your deck up to date and still winning with it there. Loving it. All right, next here we've got a Golgari mid-range deck. We've got 2 of these that were left off the list, and this one's not really special in any way. We're seeing, only 3 copies of District Guide, only 1 copy of Israel the Awakener. We're seeing some of the tokens variants here. A lot of the Selesnya tokens decks are running Thorn Lieutenant, and we're actually not. I'm not actually used to seeing this in the green-black deck. However, that's what we've got here. Ravenous Chupacabra and Vraska's Contempt just still, being those really good removal spells. Golgari Finebroker showing up in some of these decks, and some of these decks even as a 4-of. The deck is pretty straightforward. More copies of Fine, which is what we're starting to come to expect, and then multiple copies of Vraska. So this is a Golgari Doom Whisperer deck. Pretty cool, pretty straightforward. Just good mid-range beat down. Hit a curve and just stick to it. So I really like the deck. Vivian Reed's in the sideboard. Ritual of Soot. Some of these decks are actually running 2, 3, even 4 copies of Ritual Soot in the main board, and this one did not do that, and I can see that. We were seeing a lot of Assassin's Trophies, and it looks like this week we're going to be seeing more and more people drop off of the full 4-of Assassin's Trophy, so that may be saying something about the card. But I am seeing, more dead weights seem to pick up. So that was your first Golgari midrange. This is the second Golgari midrange. You'll notice here that there's very few early creatures in this deck. We do have some Land of War Elves. We've got some Jade Light Rangers. But for the most part, we're starting the early game out with cards like Treasure Map, Cast Down, Argyle's Bloodfast, and then a couple copies of Assassin's Trophy along with some dead weights. Now, when you get further up the curve here, you'll see a full playset of Eldest Reborn in this version, 1 Carnage Tyrant, and 3 Vraska Relic Seekers. Vraska's getting a lot of play here in these decks, and I'm kind of liking her spot in the meta right now. Vraska is very, very powerful and answers most of what people are trying to do in the meta. So I do like Vraska. In the sideboard, we're just seeing, like Karn, Carnage Tyrant. We are seeing an uptick on Golden Demise to help answer with the Selesnya deck, so that might be something you guys want to think about if you're running black and you're having a problem with the Selesnya decks. Now we're going to move down to an Izzet control deck. There's a lot of people talking about Arclight Phoenix decks, and this is not it. This is an Izzet control deck, but it is not the Arclight Phoenix deck, even though there is a singleton copy of Arclight Phoenix in the deck. Basically, the deck is just trying to control the game until it can get down a Dream Eater and just kind of win from there. Arclight Phoenix being able to kill multiple times, but overall, the deck is just wanting to, burn you out, and just basically that. Just burn you out, get in some small incremental damage, and then possibly finish you off with an expansion to explosion. But that's the main idea of this particular deck. We will see in the sideboard here that Goblin Electromancer and Direfleet Daredevil add a couple additional threats, along with Lava Coil as a full 4 of to be able to answer cards like Shala and such. So pretty straightforward Izzet deck. Don't know why it didn't make the TCG player list, but it was pretty cool. I do like the deck. Next, we're going to move to an Izzet Dragons deck. Now, I was talking about how I thought it was a great idea to play Sarkhan and use Sarkhan to get a turn 4 Niv Mizzet Perrin. And that's exactly what this particular deck is doing. We've got multiple 1-drops here, Essence Scatters, Negates, Search for Azcanta to make sure that we are online and we are pulling most of the deck. There are some Crackling Drakes in here, which Sarkhan cannot help you cast a Drake, only for his mana can only be used for dragons, but the Crackling Drake can still help you draw cards. When it enters the battlefield, you're going to draw a card, and it doesn't really matter if you have already used Jumpstart or not with your Chemist Insight, because the Crackling Drake can count those as well. But a turn 3 Sarkhan can lead into a turn 4 Niv Mizzet, which could be backbreaking enough. Seems like it worked really well for this pilot, and he did take it to a 5-0 finish. Now, in the sideboard, he's got some Sorcerer Spyglass, treasure maps, Disdainful Strokes, Negates, Spell Pierce, Fiery Cannonade as a full 4 of. Again, Selesnya tokens has been a bit of a deck this week, but has fallen off just a little bit. We do see Fight with Fire and more Chemist Insight in the sideboard. Pretty straightforward deck, though. Get your Sarkhan down, get Niv Mizzet online, protect it with counter spells, things of that nature, and then just, burn your opponent out. Next here, we've got another version of Izzet, and again, these last 3 Izzet decks, or this one and the other 2, were not listed on TCG Player, which kind of makes me wonder, like, why are we not getting to see the Izzet decks? Here we've got, Shock and Opt, just like we did in the last deck, Search for Azcanta, Radical Idea, but this one's going a step further. You'll notice in the mana base that there's only 2 islands in the entire deck. Everything else has the possibility of creating red mana, which works really, really well with Goblin Chainwhirler. Goblin Chainwhirler and Risk Factor both showing up in this particular version of Izzet, along with, Chemist Insight and Radical Idea for jumpstart cards, Ionize for a little bit of counter burn, and then Rekindling Phoenix for a good recursive threat to finish the game off. This deck is more or less wanting to win the game with either a Goblin Chainwhirler or Rekindling Phoenix, getting in incremental damage along with drawing some burn with your Lightning Strikes, Shocks, or Ionize. Now you can finish off with a copy of Firemind's Research, or you can use Ral Zarek to continue digging for the cards you need until you find your Banefire and Banefire them to the face, because, come on, who doesn't like to Banefire, right? More copies of Banefire in the sideboard, along with cards like Beacon Bolt and Sarkhan Fireblood. Additional copies of Risk Factor and Firemind's Research do show up here in the sideboard, along with some Lava Coils, Negates, and Essence Scatters to help round everything out. Seems to be a pretty straightforward deck. This is one of the ones that I like the most between this one and the Izzet Dragons. That's kind of where I think I want to be in Izzet, and I can't believe that they just weren't shown on TCG Player. So make sure you check the link in the description box below and go check out those decks. Now, here's a Selesnya Tokens deck that was not on the list as well, and it is a Legion's Landing, Land of War Elves, Merfolk Branchwalker, Thorn Lieutenant, like I said, is showing up in a lot of these Selesnya Tokens deck. Seems like he's a really good fit here. Jade Light Ranger along with Militia Bugler helping you, just dig for more and more creatures, along with one copy of main board here of Knight of Autumn. This is just kind of a toolbox on a stick. Really good card. I am really liking Knight of Autumn and where it's currently at. Now, this particular version did not go for the Convoke enchantment to remove things, instead going for Ixalan's Binding. Now, we are seeing multiple copies of Tristani and Tindershoot Dryad, which I Am Groot is showing up. I'm really liking this card. A lot of us have liked this card for a while, and this may be one of the best spots to put it in. You do probably already know this, but Tindershoot Dryad is not legendary. You can have multiple copies of Tindershoot Dryad out at the same time, and if you don't win after that, something's probably wrong. You have cards like Immortal Sun here to be able to shut down opposing planeswalkers. Shutting down cards like Teferi and things of that nature could be absolutely devastating. We did talk about Immortal Sun in our last meta coverage video, and now we're starting to see a little bit more play of Immortal Sun as an Anthem effect, as a ramp effect by making your spells cost less, and then also as a card draw engine. The card is absolutely phenomenal if you can get there and get it down. Now, in the sideboard, we're seeing cards like Shieldmare and Lyra Dawnbringer to give you additional life gain. We also see Knight of Autumn, which can do the same thing, only with a couple extra abilities on it in case you don't need the life, maybe just some enchantment or artifact hate, or maybe you just want more threats. We are seeing multiple copies of Dawn of Hope showing up in these decks, along with some Baffling Ends to answer those early creatures. And then, of course, against the targeted base removal decks, we do have a copy of Shaper's Sanctuary. So pretty straightforward, Selesnya deck. I was a little bit surprised to not see the Conclave Cavalier in here, but it does show up in a couple of the other decks. Now, next here, we're going to move to Abzan Knights. Now, these will be the first decks that are on your TCG player list if you go look for that list. Matter of fact, I'll throw that in the description box below. Should be like the third link or something like that. Abzan Knights is almost exactly what we've seen in the last video. So not a lot has changed here. Our Dauntless Bodyguard, along with full sets of Autumn Knight, Knight of Malice, Knight of Grace, History of Benalia, and Valiant Knight. So it's 100% a Knights deck with a Johnny to pump up those Knights. And then, of course, Conclave to remove anything that would be devastating. Lyra Dawnbringer to, get in the air, maybe finish them off, be a really hard threat to answer. And then that's pretty much the deck. A little bit of Assassin's Trophy to make sure that you can deal with most things. Now, in the sideboard, we've got just a bunch of the same. We've got some board wipes, Vraska's Relic Seeker, Ritual of Soot, which could seem a little bit counterproductive, but if you hold off a little while, and then maybe you can have a really explosive turn 5 after you have cast your Ritual of Soot. This could be absolutely devastating. And then Karn here for additional card draw, and Duress to hose your opponent. Rip those good cards right out of their hand. They've only got one or two answers for maybe your Knight of Grace, which has hexproof from black. And then you can kind of maybe duress those answers away. So that's pretty cool. We do have an Abzan mid-range deck here, and this is kind of like Abzan Angels, and that's kind of what I want to name it. They're calling it Abzan mid-range. It's one of the few decks running 4 copies of Assassin's Trophy in the main board. More Thorn Lieutenant showing up in a lot of these decks here. So Thorn Lieutenant could be in a really good spot this season, and we're starting to see it in a lot of decks. I am really liking Thorn Lieutenant in my playtesting. Resplendent Angel, Shala Voice of Plenty, and Lyra Dawnbringer bringing up the Angel package here. We do see Territorial Allosaur showing up with the 4-mana 5/5, but a 7-mana with a kicker, a 5/5 that gets to fight something when it enters the battlefield. Not a bad card to top deck late in the game. We got 1 copy of Vraska Golgari Queen, along with 1 copy of Karn in the main board. 2 copies of Vraska Relic Seeker, though. And then the rest of the deck's pretty straightforward. Just some early creatures that all do things. So it's kind of Abzan Value Town, but for better or worse, it's Abzan Angels. When we look over at the sideboard, we're going to see more of the things that we've been seeing in all the other green-black decks and Abzan decks. Probably exactly what you would expect. Settle the Wreckage, more Lyra Dawnbringers, more copies of Eldest Reborn, Ritual of Soot, 3 copies of Golden Demise, which I find to be kind of strange, considering most people would think that this is, a March of the Multitudes deck. However, there are no March of Multitudes in this particular deck. Now, next year we're going to be going to another copy of Abzan Midrange. Now, this one's quite different. This does not have the Angel package, even though it does have a couple copies of Lyra Dawnbringer. We also don't see the Thorn Lieutenants in the main board. This particular version has went for the Explorer version, so we've got multiple copies of Wild Growth Walker. Full play set of Wild Growth Walker, Merfolk Branch Walker, a few copies of Seeker's Squire. Now, in the last coverage video, I talked about how they were using multiple copies of Seeker's Squire instead of multiple copies of Merfolk Branch Walker, and because of that, we've actually seen a swap here. Less copies of Seeker's Squire and more copies of Merfolk Branch Walker here, which means the deck is trying to be slightly more aggressive, or maybe just has an easier time getting early green mana, one or the other. Now, it does have 4 full copies of Jadelight Ranger, and then of course we are seeing Fine Finale show up as the split card of choice in most of these Golgari and Abzan decks. Now, Vraska seems to show up in all of these decks in one form or another. Here we have 1 of Vraska Relic Seeker with 2 of Vraska Golgari Queen. Eldest Reborn also showing up in most of these decks. This particular version is still running the 3 copies of Israeth and Ravenous Chupacabra. So pretty cool deck. I like the layout here. I like the Explore mechanics that are being used. So if the last one was Abzan Angels, this one has to be Abzan Explore. In the sideboard, we're seeing cards like Vivian Reed and Karn, our Scion of Urza. I really do like the Profane Procession here, because some of these decks that we are talking about, the control decks and such, only have a few creatures, and 1 Profane Procession could be enough removal to deal with the entire deck, making them have to rely on an alternate win condition to be able to beat you. So I do love the Profane Procession. We talked about Thorn Lieutenant is very good. Maybe this particular deck builder or pilot discovered that the Thorn Lieutenant was best against certain matchups, probably against matchups that have that target base removal, and put his in the sideboard for that reason. Next here we have Azorius Control. This is a pretty straightforward blue-white deck. We had 1 copy last week. It looks like we've got 1 copy again this week. The deck looks pretty straightforward. Cleansing Novas, Settle the Wreckage. Now, last week we seen a little bit of recursion from the graveyard using the Mission Briefing. We're not seeing that here. This is pretty straightforward. We're just countering things with Sinister Sabotage, answering the things that are on the board with Seal Away, Settle the Wreckage, Cleansing Novas, buying that time till you can get your Teferi emblem off. Teferi is the primary win con in this deck. As far as win cons go, it's the only win con in the main board, other than your 2 Lyra Dawnbringers. So if they can answer Lyra Dawnbringer, Profane Procession, if you can answer Lyra Dawnbringer, then at that point, the only way that they're going to be able to beat you is with a Teferi. Now, in the sideboard, there's a couple other ways that the deck could beat you, and that's with Murmuring Mystic, or sorry, not Murmuring Mystic, Mystic Archaeologist, which just basically allows them to draw more cards and gives them a slight, threat with a 2/1. Probably really good in the control matchups. We're seeing Shieldmare, which can gain you some life and can't be blocked by red creatures. Not a bad card. More Lyra Dawnbringer and Nizahal to be able to, push that extra threat, throw down that really big body that is almost impossible to remove. So pretty straightforward blue-white control deck. Again, they are stuck running the Meandering Rivers. It may or may not be a problem. It looks like it wasn't a problem for this pilot. So, all right, we are now on Boros. We've got quite a few Boros decks here for you guys. This first one is Boros Angels, which I am putting at the very top of the Angels of the Boros list. I think this is probably one of the best Boros lists that is currently out there. I really do like this version of Boros, and I think that with a couple of Johnnies, it would probably be in the perfect spot. Here we're seeing a couple main boards settle the wreckage, so I'm not really understanding that. Maybe because you're wanting to tap out every turn, settle the wreckage. Will keep you safe. When you tap out. But I would rather have a Johnny in this slot, and I think that this would be where I would want to be in Boros. Swiftblade Vindicator, Boros Challenger. You also have, the Deafening Clarion, which allows you to, give lifelink to, some of your other creatures. Like as if Lyra is not going to give lifelink to all your angels anyway, but giving lifelink to some of your other creatures and wiping the board at the same time seems to be the main idea here. Response being a really good piece of removal. Response deals 5 damage to target attacking or blocking creature for 2 mana at instant speed, and then of course creatures you control gain first strike and vigilance, and then you get that extra combat phase, which could just be everything you need to go ahead and hose your opponent and be done with it. When we look at the sideboard on this one, we're going to see Experimental Frenzy is starting to pick up more popularity. We also have multiple copies of Shala, Voice of Plenty, along with extra copies of Settle the Wreckage. 4 full copies of Seal Away to deal with early creatures, or even hard to deal with creatures that do have to tap. So additional Deafening Clarions and Karn in the sideboard make this a pretty well-rounded deck, guys. This is definitely my pick. I would still want to put 2 copies of a Johnny in this deck somewhere. I think I would just have to have a couple copies of a Johnny. But all in all, the deck is just absolutely insane. Definitely my pick for one of the best Boros decks out there. We are going to move on to some of the other Boros decks. A lot of them are going to look very, very close to what we have seen here. Now this particular one is running Fanatical Firebrand and Rigging Runner, which is showing that this deck is trying to be much more aggressive. We're seeing Sunhome Stalwart, which is another mentor creature, and so I would definitely give this particular version of the deck the title of a mentor deck, Boros Mentor instead of Boros Angels. We're seeing History of Benalia along with Tajik showing up in a lot of these decks. No Boros Guild Mage, what's it called? Boros Challenger is the Boros guy. Okay. Here they actually went for Sunhome Stalwart. So yeah, it makes sense. Giving that first strike seems to be really, really good, especially if you're going to follow up with something like Tajik. Giving your small dude, who will then become a 3 powered, 3 toughness first striker, seems really, really good. Goblin Chain Whirler, anyone? Integrity Intervention seems to be the card that makes these Boros mentor decks work. Being able to give a particular creature the extra +2/+0 at any time for 1 mana means that you can get your Tajik up to 5 power to be able to give something an extra +1/1 counter when you get into combat with it. Also, being able to give your Tajik the extra 2 toughness, making it have a total of 4 toughness, means that it will survive most combat damage. So pretty good tech to run the integrity with the Tajiks and stuff. Now when we look at the sideboard, we I guess I need to say this is the only deck today that was running Path of Metal. So if you like Goblin Chain Whirler for the fact that it enters the battlefield and does 1 damage to each creature that doesn't have first strike, double strike, vigilance, or haste, then Path of Metal seems like it's pretty good. I'm not 100% sure if I like Path of Metal or not, because most of the small creatures that are getting play have some kind of first strike or something like that. So we are seeing, a lot of these keywords in a lot of decks. I don't necessarily know if this is exactly how we're supposed to answer them or not, but it seemed to work for this pilot. Now, in the sideboard here, we're seeing more Experimental Frenzies, a full playset of Lyra Dawnbringer, because, let's face it, when you mean it, you mean it, right? Justice Strike, a way to deal with opposing Lyra Dawnbringers, Galtas, things of that nature. Speaking of Galta, we'll show you one that means it here in just a moment. Justice Strike, really good piece of removal, and we're starting to see it in more and more decks. Also with Lava Coil, same thing. We're starting to see a lot of Lava Coil in sideboards, things of that nature, just to deal with these Shalaz and other large creatures. So next here, we're going to move on down to the third Boros aggro. This is a Heroic Reinforcements deck. Heroic Reinforcements, along with cards like Benelish Marshal, giving you an extra pump. We don't have any Swiftblade Vindicators here. Instead, this deck has went with Boros Challenger and Sunhome Stalwart, which was, I guess that's pretty straightforward. Just more 2-drops. You don't have to worry about just 1 damage dealing with your your small dude. It does make it where you're not going to get as many mentor triggers, but you don't necessarily need the extra mentor trigger if your guy just is naturally larger anyway. I do like the Rustwing Falcon in this deck, as Rustwing Falcon is a great way to get in with your second creature, to make sure that if you are going to be using something like Integrity on your Tajik, and then you swing with your Rustwing Falcon, that it's already got a little bit of evasion. If you can start pumping it up, making it a little bit bigger, getting this up to a 3-4 or something in the air could be quite devastating for your opponent. There's a lot of roadblock cards here with a ton of 1-drops like Hunted Witness and Hazada Marshall, which can make some additional tokens for you. So pretty cool deck, pretty straightforward. We are seeing more copies of Integrity in these mentor decks. It seems to be like the card to run. Now, in the sideboard of this particular mentor deck, we do see a Ajani Adversary of Tyrants, and I keep talking about how I like a Ajani Adversary of Tyrants as a theory to put with your mentor creatures. Now, maybe this pilot has found that there's certain matchups where that lineup works better than others and decided to put his Ajanis in the sideboard. But we also see cards like Deafening Clarion, Shala Voice of Plenty, Banefire, because who doesn't like the Banefire, and Fight with Fire, because come on, you got to be able to answer Shala, right? And then let's jump down to Boros Angels. Now, this is a true Boros Angels deck. We're running 4 copies of Lyra Dawnbringer main board, 3 copies of Shala Voice of Plenty, 4 copies of Resurgence, Resplendent Angel, and then 3 copies of Aurelia. A lot of power here in this deck, a ton of power. You're going to be gaining a ton of life because you are going to be hitting a Lyra. There's 4 Lyras. You are going to be hitting a Lyra, so you can liberally apply your indestructible to your Adanto's Vanguard and continue getting in, and then not worry about that because you are going to be gaining that life back, and you're going to be making additional angels with your Resplendent Angel Lyra Dawnbringer combo. Now, in the sideboard here, I do want to point out, for those of you that have not noticed it, Resplendent Angel can swing by itself if you do have like a Lyra Dawnbringer out and an Aurelia. Resplendent Angel can have just the 5 toughness or 5 power all by itself. So if you have a way to give it lifelink, that's pretty good all by itself. And you can leave the Lyra Dawnbringer back for blocks or something of that nature. However, if it's something that could possibly kill a Lyra Dawnbringer, then it's going to kill anything else anyway. So I don't know if that's like relevant or not, but Aurelia does make Resplendent Angel 5 power. So that is a thing. Now, in the sideboard here, We do have 3 copies of Banefire, which seems to be pretty standard at this point. Settle the Wreckage, more Shalai, Voice of Plenties, Ixalan's Binding, which is showing up in some of these decks, but not all of them, and Deafening Clarion, along with Sorcerer Spyglass and Seal Away. So we're seeing some repetitiveness here in these decks. This particular deck's not running any of the split cards, which was a little bit strange, but it is an Angel deck, not necessarily a Mentor deck. We don't see any of the Mentor abilities here. If it had any ability other than Angel Tribal, I would say it was a Convoke deck more than it was anything else. But that's not necessarily true either. All right, we're going to move on to the next copy of Angels. This is an Angels Mentor deck, and we definitely got to give the title Angels here because it's running a singleton copy of Light of the Legion. Light of the Legion is a flying 5/5 with Mentor. When Light of the Legion dies, put a 1/1 counter on each white creature you control. That is pretty good. So if they can deal with your 5/5 flyer, then you're going to get a 1/1 counter across your board, which is pretty awesome if you ask me. I do like the idea of this. It's pretty cool to be able to see this one of being thrown in here, pairing up with cards like Lyra Dawnbringer. I actually think this is a perfect 4th copy of Lyra Dawnbringer, just so that you're not overdrawing your Lyras, not getting stuck with cards in your hand that you can't use. Phoenix is a great blocker, great way to push damage and make sure that you don't have a lot of damage coming at you. Great way to tax your opponent's removal spells, making them deal with the Phoenix. Testing their hand and things of that nature before you slam down a Lyra. Phoenix is absolutely terrific. So in the sideboard, we're going to see a little bit of a different pace here. We are still seeing the Experimental Frenzies and Banefires, but instead of the Sealaways in this particular deck, we've got 4 copies of Remorseful Cleric. Now that is a flyer, and that can be a good beater in some cases, but in most cases, this is just your aggressive graveyard hate. Pretty cool card. I like the card. The instant speed ability to just sack and wipe out the graveyards. Pretty good. All right, next we've got a Boros Dragons deck. If you like dragons, it's hard to call this a Boros deck because the only card again is Justice Strike in the main board. As far as sideboard goes, there are no white cards whatsoever. Just Banefires, Fight with Fires, Fiery Cannonade, Lightning Mare, and Lava Coils. Now the main board's pretty straightforward. Hit your Sarkhan. Once you hit Sarkhan, you can use that mana to cast Victrix Bladewing, even using it to kick it. You can get down your Demanding Dragons or a Lathliss. Get a Lathliss down and then cast a Demanding Dragon, and things are about to get out of hand. Heaven forbid, you get Lathliss down, cast your kicked Victrix Bladewing. You won't get a trigger from Karok's Bladewing, but you will get a trigger for Victrix. So pretty cool deck. Because it's just splashing the white, makes it very easy for this deck to run Goblin Chainwhirler. I like this deck. It's pretty straightforward. It is a red deck, but Boros Dragons is what we've got what we've got it tagged with. This particular version of Boros Midrange is also a red deck that is just barely splashed red. Here we've got 2 copies of Integrity in the main board, and then in the sideboard, we actually have some white spells. Here we've got Deafening Clarion, Ixalan's Binding, Lyra Dawnbringer, and Watley, Warrior Poet. And then, of course, 4 Banefires, because somebody really likes to Banefire people. All right. As far as the main board goes, this is kind of a Goblin deck with Goblin Crater Maker, Goblin Chainwhirler, and then Siege Gang Goblin, but not necessarily a Goblin deck. We do have Experimental Frenzies in the main board, Rekindling Phoenix, and Legion Warboss. Legion Warboss, just giving you plenty of goblins to feed to your Siege Gang commander, works really, really well. We are seeing Dismissive Pyromancer show up yet again as a 2-mana 2/2 with some abilities. You know, paying 1, tap it, discard a card, draw a card. Pay 3, tap it, and sacrifice it. You can deal 4 damage to a creature. Not very, not the greatest creature in the world, but then again, not the worst either. So I do like it. We are seeing more Runaway Steamkin. This card looks like it's the real deal, and it's shown up in multiple copies this week. So next here, we're going to move down to Esper Control. All right, Esper Control here is, let's face it, this is a blue-black control deck, splashed white for only a few things. For the most part here, you're going to be trying to kill or counter everything the opponent does. Trying to 1-for-1 your opponent until you can get your Teferi down to maintain multiple copies of cards in your hand so that you can answer every card. We are seeing multiple copies of Ritual of Soot in the main board and a singleton copy of Chromium. For those of you that don't know about Chromium, I'll actually read this for you. It's Esper colors, so 1 black, 1 blue, 1 white, and then 4 colorless. That's 7 mana, ladies and gentlemen. For a flash flying, cannot be countered. Flash Flying cannot be countered 7/7 with a cool ability on it. You can discard a card, and until end of turn, Chromium will turn into a human. It'll lose its other abilities, but it's going to gain a couple new ones. It's going to have Hexproof, it's only a 1/1, and it can't be blocked. So if they do decide to do something to your Chromium, you can still just, you know what, I'm getting in for 1 anyway. Let's do this. Chromium's pretty cool, pretty straightforward dragon. I do like this Elder Dragon. Works really, really well with Teferi, and you only need a light splash to make it happen. Now, Esper is one of those decks that may actually be served better as a... thank you, Max. Might be served better as, Esper instead of blue-white, but we did see an Azorius control. I do think that this is probably the better control deck. Maybe using some of the lines being taken by Lagzilla in his Dimir control deck, to help you morph this deck versus your meta. If you know that you're fighting against a ton of tokens and Boros and stuff, look at what Lagzilla did with his Dimir deck this week, and that'll tell you exactly how to combat that. If you're starting to see more and more control decks, then you might want to shift back to Lagzilla's deck last week, or you could always just run this version. Now, Vona, Butcher of Magon, here in the sideboard, along with Eldest Reborn, the 4th copy of Ritual of Soot. A little bit of artifact and enchantment destruction. It may come as a surprise to some of you guys, but blue-black cannot destroy an enchantment, never has. Probably never will be able to. Blue, black, and red actually cannot destroy enchantments. So there's just no card printed that can actually destroy an enchantment. So having white enchantment-based removal here seems to be the way to go. Fungal Infection showing up in the sideboard along with Disdainful Stroke. Pretty cool. That's basically it for this particular deck. It's just a straightforward, I'm either going to kill your stuff, I'm going to counter your stuff, I'm going to land my Teferi or my Chromium. You will notice that Teferi is also the only win condition in this deck. Just being able to resolve a Teferi and then protect it is the way to go. I do think that this deck dies very, very hard to a card like Ixalan's Binding. 1 copy of Ixalan's Binding on a Teferi, and they are going to have a very, very bad day. So do think about that. All right, next here we're going to jump into Golgari. These are going to be your 4 Golgari decks other than the 2 that I've already covered. These 4 Golgari decks are kind of like the other ones we covered. I think that this one might be a little bit more competitive than one of the others we covered that was very similar. This is using the Explorer package. Here we have 4 copies of Wildgrowth Walker, 4 copies of Merfolk Branchwalker, and 4 copies of Seeker Squire in the 2-drop slot. Only 2 copies of Assassin's Trophy and 2 copies of cast down for early game removal. Midnight Reaper showing up here. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. Not bad. I actually think it's a great way to draw, continue drawing cards, and you probably can afford the life off of it due to your Wild Growth Walker. I think this is an extremely strong deck, and it's probably going to be on our radar for quite some time, just for the sheer velocity of explore creatures and +1/1 counters this deck can get, and life gain this deck has. A lot of people are trying, decks that want to burn you out. Is it counter burn and things of that nature, and that's going to be really, really hard to do when you're gaining 3 life every time you explore, when you have all of these explore creatures in the deck. And then, of course, drawing those additional cards from your Midnight Reaper seems great. We also have multiple copies of Vraska's Contempt and Ravenous Chupacabra, which are just really, really good cards. Vraska showing up here as a 2 Vraska showing up here, Vraska Golgari Queen, and then Vraska Relic Seeker, 2 of each, just absolutely terrific. And then, of course, you can always just hose your opponent with a Carnage Tyrant. And if they can somehow get rid of it, you can just find it back and go do it again. Alright, so in the sideboard we have additional Carnage Tyrants, Vivian Reed, Deathgorge Scavenger. Looks like it is all of the graveyard removal a lot of these decks are needing. There are multiple answers to graveyards in the format right now, most of those being artifact based, but Deathgorge Scavenger seems to be the card that people are using, giving you a nice threat to push damage along with the ability to gain some additional life. Makes it a very, very versatile card. I do like it, and I do like this deck. I think the deck is very, very powerful and very well suited. So that's why I have it picked as your first Golgari mid-range deck. Now the next 2 decks are going to get a little bit stranger. So this is going to be your Golgari Feinbroker. Here we'll see a copy of what we kind of seen the first week. I was talking about I didn't necessarily like the district guide, and I thought that it would be better suited as a 2-drop or a different 3-drop. So this particular version of the deck is still running the district guide. I think that a lot of people are going to come off of this and go more towards the explore mechanics and using the Wild Growth Walkers, but that will also depend on what we're actually facing, because if we look at the sideboard of this particular deck, we're going to see there are the Wild Growth Walkers and a full play set of them. So Wild Growth Walker being the life gain of choice, if you're thinking you're running into a lot of aggressive decks, a lot of burn decks and things of that nature, then Wild Growth Walker is going to be absolutely terrific. 4 copies of Ravenous Chupacabra along with Izona Thousand-Eyed here. So you play your decks out, or you play your deck out as people kill things. Then you play an Izona Thousand-Eyed. You have a bunch of creatures. You can then slowly pick your opponent apart by just drawing more cards and just throwing more threats on the battlefield. I do like the Golgari Feinbroker here. No, it's not Eternal Witness, but it's going to work great at getting you things like your Eldest Reborn or your Vraska's back, which, again, running both Vraska's here, both the Golgari Queen and the Relic Seeker. Pretty cool deck. I do like the deck, but I personally like the main board Wild Growth Walkers better. And again, we have Fine Finale in the deck. Duress, Argyle's Bloodfast, Plague Crafter, all the things that we're kind of coming used to seeing in these decks. So it looks like we're probably not a long way off of finding a pretty solid, straightforward what our Golgari mid-range deck is going to be. Here we see the version of the deck that's running 4 Golgari Feinbrokers here. Now this deck is running Dryad Green Seekers, District Guides, Jadelight Rangers, Deathgorge Scavengers in the main board, and then not as much in the early board. The early part of the game is kind of spent on removal in this particular deck, or just trying to get set up with your Dryad Green Seeker. Now, This deck is putting a lot of emphasis on being able to grab land off the top of the deck, or grab land from the deck using District Guide and Dryad Greenseeker. But it, like the other decks, it is running Vraska and Fine and Ravenous Chupacabra. So again, pretty straightforward. You know, play your creatures. When they kill them, play a Golgari, Fine Broker, get the creature back, play it again, and just keep getting value every time you play the creatures. And then, of course, in the sideboard, Duress, Rituals of Soot, Eldest Reborn. This kind of works as a great little pairing. Whether you're on the play or the draw, this seems to be terrific on your turn 4 into a turn 5. Ritual of Soot into Eldest Reborn. I think that's definitely going to be a line that we have to worry about and we have to play around when we're playing against these Golgari decks. So next here we've got a Golgari Stompy. This is your mono green splashed black deck. The main board is mono green, and we've got 4 copies of Ghalta along with Nullhide Ferox. When you've got this many copies of Ghalta, you really mean it. You plan on getting this Ghalta down as early as possible, and this deck can do just that. Pel Collector on 1, followed by a Thorn Lieutenant. You've got 4 power on the board already. Follow up with a turn 3 Stillleaf Champion, and you can have your Ghalta down as early as turn 4. So pretty cool. I do like that. You could, yeah, that's a lot of power. That is a ton of power. If you do start out with a turn 2 Harpooner and something happens to it instead of your Pelt Collector, you're looking at a 3-powered Pelt Collector. Follow up with Stillleaf Champion for a 4-powered Pelt Collector, and you can still get your turn 4 Ghalta out. So turn 4 Ghalta, not out of the question with this deck, but you might be asking, why the black mana? Well, the black mana is for Vraska and Duress. That's it. Alright, moving on past Golgari, we're going to go check out these 2 Grixis decks that made the list today. The first one here is your Grixis Dragons. Now, I thought this deck was absolutely awesome. If you do check on TCG Player, this is going to be listed as your Grixis Historic deck. Don't particularly, like the idea of Historic because, first off, there's no Saga in here other than Eldest Reborn. But the only thing that would make this deck just seem like it's historic is it has a Legendary Sorcery in it. Well, Legendary Sorceries doesn't even care about historic cards. It only cares about legendary creatures and planeswalkers. So I think it's a Dragons deck. I'm going to call it Grixis Dragons. You guys can call it historic if you want. The deck is packing a little bit of fun times here with Lazav, a little bit of jank, if you will. Lazav and Thief of Sanity trying to get a couple extra cards. Copying things with Lazav seems great. But for the most part, this deck is doing exactly like the Izzet deck that we watched earlier. It's using Sarkhan the Fireblood to get down something like a turn 4 Niv Mizzet. Now, turn 4 Niv Mizzet, or just having a Nicol Bolas with a little bit of backup for, whatever, maybe a cast down or something to help clear the way or something like that seems to be really good as well. Being able to throw away cards like Radical Idea seems to be absolutely terrific. Throw it away with Sarkhan, draw a different card, and then later you can just recast the Radical Idea if you draw a card you don't want. Spit Flame, great card here. Another just reason to call this Grixis Dragons instead of historic. But hey, call it whatever you want. It's your video, right? All right, now we've got just a toolbox here in the sideboard, so I'll let you guys kind of take it at ever how you want. Star of Extinction and Banefire, some really big spells here. Form of the Dinosaur. I had to read this card. I'm going to let you guys read this card. It's a 6 mana enchantment. When Form of the Dinosaur enters the battlefield, your life total becomes 15. At the beginning of your upkeep, Form of the Dinosaur deals 15 damage to target creature an opponent controls, and that creature deals damage equal to its power to you. That is not a May ability. Okay, At the beginning of your upkeep, Form of the Dinosaur is going to deal 15 damage to a creature. And then that creature is going to hit you. Every turn. That creature is going to hit you. Yeah, that creature deals damage equal to its power to you. So if that creature does have lifelink, they're going to gain some life off of that. You're going to lose some life. They're going to lose a creature. So, whoa. The only time this would not trigger is if there is not a creature on the battlefield or the creature cannot be targeted. Form of the Dinosaur. Interesting card. I thought it was cool to see here. Had to point it out to you guys. Everything else is pretty much straightforward in toolbox fashion. One duress, one spell pierce. This is kind of what you expect to see at the beginning of a format, and then as the format, starts to solve a little bit, and we have less decks to have to worry about, you'll see less and less of this, scattered toolbox effect here. So. But that's kind of what Grixis has always been about, having a toolbox that's good at answering everything. You'll also see a bunch of 2-ubs here: 2 Sheevan Fire, 2 Split Flame, 2 Fiery Cannonade, 2 Rekindling Phoenix, things like that. Because this looks like it's a testing deck. They want to test this, see what works best, see if this card works great, if this card works great, and that's just kind of one of the tactics that a lot of people use. Looks like this particular deck worked pretty well. Personally, I think that Sarkin into Niv Mizzet on turn 4 is pretty much all you need to just really hose people. Next here, we've got another Grixis mid-range, and this one is only red for Nicol Bolas. Alright, if we do look into the sideboard, we will see a little bit more red in Ralzeric, and that's about it. We've got Dream Eaters, Eldest Reborn, Disdainful Stroke, Negate, just some extra kill spells, Ravenous Chupacabra, that sort of thing. In the main board, though, the real idea with this particular deck is to either get out a Nicol Bolas, get out a Thief of Sanity, or a Doom Whisperer, and kill your opponent with that. You've got good protection here in Golden Demise, Vraska's Contempt, Cast Down, Dead Weight, and Thought Erasure. So a lot of ways to rip away those early creatures, take the hardest things to deal with directly out of their hand, and then just kind of kill everything else. Pretty straightforward. I don't like the idea that Thief of Sanity will kill Golden Demise, but hey, you've got a Lazav to copy it and do it again later. So that's your Grixis decks. Here is the only Izzet deck that got posted on TCG Player, and it kind of breaks my heart. But this is the Arclight Phoenix deck that all of you have been looking for. Now, I know a lot of people have seen this deck, and you've probably gotten beaten by the deck. Arclight Phoenix here is just absolutely phenomenal, and this deck uses it to its fullest capacity. Now, this is an Enigma Drake, Crackling Drake deck, but it's an Arclight Phoenix deck. This is a 3/2 that has flying and haste, and it becomes a free card for you when you're throwing it away to things like Tormenting Voice and Chart of Course. You'll notice that there's a plethora of 1-drops and 2-drops in the deck, so that if you have a Goblin Electromancer, you can then make your 2-drops into 1-drops, cast your Tormenting Voice, cast your Chart of Course, throw away your Arclight Phoenixes, continue casting cards like Crash Through, which will give your creatures trample, and then you'll enter combat, bring your Arclight Phoenixes back from the graveyard, and just beat people in the face. There are many cantrips in this deck, and that's what we're seeing here with Warlord's Fury and Crash Through. They both allow you to draw a card, and you don't necessarily have to have any creatures on the battlefield, to just be able to cycle these cards away. 1 mana, cycle it, draw a card. 1 mana, cycle your Warlords, draw a card. 1 mana, cycle your Op, draw a card. Enter combat, get your Arclight Phoenixes back, beat somebody in the face, and just kind of go from there. It also gives you a really good way to fill your graveyard up with for your Enigma Drakes and your Crackling Drakes. I really do like this deck. I wish that we had other cantrips other than just blowing Crash Throughs and Warlord's Fury, but hey, if it works, it works. In the sideboard, additional copies of Crackling Drake. We've got Beacon's Bolt, Lava Coil, Disdainful Stroke, Shock, and Lightning Strike. So pretty straightforward sideboard. Nothing just completely out of the ordinary there. And you know, a lot of people may originally think that when they're playing against this deck, as soon as you see a Warlord's Fury or a Crash Through, do know which deck that you're playing. You're playing against the Arclight Phoenix deck, and deal with the Arclight Phoenixes the best that you can. They are going to be hard to deal with. All right, next here we've got a Jeskai control deck. We've got a couple Jeskai control decks. Then we've got a Jeskai Taking Turns or Jeskai Nexus deck, but it's going to look a lot like these control decks as well. The basic idea here is to control the game using, you know, Justice Strikes, Lava Coils as removal, along with, you know, Ionize, Sinister Sabotage, a Devious Cover Up here, and some Essence Scatters, Disdainful Strokes, things like that for counter spells. Take take an extra turn from your opponent using your Dream Eater, flash it in when they've played, you know, one of their big creatures, bounce that back, and then, you know, you'll get to basically blank their entire turn. They tapped out and maybe didn't get a whole lot out of it. So Dream Eater is really good here with the flash and flying, giving you 4 power in the air to just kind of finish your games off. Teferi, of course, being, you know, probably the primary win con here. You know, if you can get a Teferi down and then be able to protect that Teferi, then it's going to be really hard for your opponents to win from there. Now, in the sideboard, we've got cards like Crackling Drake as an additional win con to bringing in more threats, negates, disdainful strokes, you know, just more of the Jeskai colored stuff that answers stuff. So, you know, I guess you could pick, you know, your best cards to answer certain decks. But with this sideboard, it just looks like, you know, he's taking out certain counters that might be bad in a particular matchup, bringing in counters that would be better, just trading counters out for, you know, the proper counters, or if you need more of a particular card, there seems to be a third or fourth copy there somewhere. So pretty straightforward. I like it. Probably a little bit difficult to pilot, considering it is a main win con Teferi deck. So our next Jeskai deck is a lot like the Jeskai control deck we seen last week that had 3 copies of Teferi and 1 copy of Ralzeric. We do have multiple copies of Expansion Explosion here. Awesome card, being able to draw you a bunch of, you know, cards and deal some damage to your opponents. If you're not worried about life gain, then that's absolutely where you want to be. Being able to, you know, finish your opponent off. Now in the sideboard here, we've got Lyra Dawnbringer and Niv Mizzet along with Nizahal to give yourself some major threats, heavy hitters to bring in, additional, you know, counter spells and things like that. And then of course, if they're against, you know, a black based removal deck, Knight of Grace almost cannot be removed. So be wary about Knights of Grace if you are playing one of the Golgari decks or you're playing blue-black control. So next here we've got Jeskai Dragons. You'll see, Jeskai Dragons. In the sideboard, we've got a Niv Mizzet. We've got Ixalan's Binding, Silent Gravestone as the choice graveyard hate here. Sorcerer's Spyglass. I don't know if you can get away with calling, Teferi with Sorcerer's Spyglass in this particular deck, considering you're running 3 copies of Teferi yourself, along with 3 copies of Sarkhan. Again, we are seeing Sarkhan help you get that turn 4 Niv Mizzet down. Could be one of the most powerful plays in Izzet right now. There are multiple decks that 5-0'd with this play, and I think that it is something we should probably watch. Moving on into the next deck, this is a Jeskai Nexus deck. Again, we're just trying to control the board, get down a Karn or a Teferi, continue drawing cards, then, you know, take a couple extra turns with Nexus of Fate, continue drawing cards, use that to get our Teferi to ultimate, and then eventually exile absolutely everything, hopefully getting to that perfect finish where your opponent has 0 things on the field and you have all the things on the field, which at that point it doesn't matter if you pass the turn, you can deal with every land that they ever play. That's kind of that perfect finish, and it is achievable here in this particular version of Jeskai. So looking at the sideboard here, we're going to see, you know, more Lyra Dawnbringers and Nizahal, which seem to be pretty straightforward for the Jeskai decks. Bring in a Lyra Dawnbringer against things where you need to gain life. Bring in Nizahal against control decks. Maybe even bring in Lyra against control decks to give you an additional threat. The lower curve in the sideboard is just used for giving you the proper kill and counter for a given deck, and then of course Expansion Explosion. We've talked about how good this card is with its X cost to be able to allow you, to just draw a bunch of cards and deal a bunch of damage. Seems to be pretty sweet. I like the card. I like this deck in general. I don't know if this is going to be as powerful as the Nexus of Fate decks were with, Turbo Fog, but I do like the deck. I think that there should be other ways to help you, cycle through your deck, draw more cards, and trade cards for more cards and thin the deck out. And I'm sure that someone's going to play around with this and find the optimal way to thin your deck. So, pretty cool deck. Next here, one that all of you are going to love: Mono Black with Chromatic Lantern. That's right, Mono Black with Chromatic Lantern. I am still on the fence about why we have Chromatic Lantern. I assume that it's so that we can cast the back halves of Fine Finale and Discovery Dispersal. Now, casting the back halves of these is great, but the main idea of this deck is to draw cards, place, just good average creatures down that help you deal with the board state. Deal with the board state with good spells. Plague Crafter coming in as a 4 of here. Ravenous Chupacabra is a 4 of. We got multiple copies of Vraska's Contempt and Eldest Reborn. And then, of course, 4 Doom Whisperers. This is Mono Black Doom Whisperer. You do have cards like Karn and Tezamok. You can, start your rounds filling out your additional mana per turn. So if you're on turn 4 and you only play a Plague Crafter, you can use that extra mana to put a prey counter on whatever else is left. If you did turn 2 put a prey counter on something with your Tezamok, that might be the target for them to sack, and then you end up just putting a prey counter on the next creature anyway. So could be straightforward, just a really good deck. I do like that someone is trying and pushing the idea of Mono Black. That's something that we're going to see, for a while. Mono Black has all the parts that it really needs to be able to fight in just about any given meta, especially with cards like Ritual of Soot around. So I wouldn't doubt Mono Black actually being a deck in this format. So we'll see. Additional Tezamok in the sideboard, though, might want to mention that. Pretty cool card, and I guess in this particular deck, it's exactly what you want. So I do like the Mono Black deck. Next, we've got a Mono Blue Wizards deck. Now, I want to say congratulations to Wedge on this one. This deck looks straight up like Wedge's deck tech last week. So maybe someone took that deck tech and said, hey, I'm going to run this Metamorphic Alteration Warkite Marauder version of the deck. We'll notice that there are no exclusion mages in the main board. If you do go over to the sideboard, you will find those exclusion mages. Everything else in the deck is pretty much exactly what we've kind of come to expect. Sleep, Syncopate, Diamond Mare. Great deck. Probably one of the best game 1 decks that you can get. Perfect for arena and things like that. I'm just gonna move on to Mono Red. This is Mono Red Wizard Burn. We seen it last week. It showed up again. You're definitely you got your wizards here and get to Lava Runner, Virashino Pyromancer, and then that's going to help you cast your Wizard's Lightning. Now the other cards are not wizards. You've either got the Elementals or you've got Frantic Firebrand, which is a goblin along with Goblin Chain Whirler. So we don't have that many wizards, but the wizards we do have will help us get the Wizard's Lightning online. And then, of course, we've got Shock and Lightning Strike. So only 8 wizards, not necessarily my cup of tea, but 4 copies of Risk Factor, which I believe a lot of you are excited to play with that card. And its prices have shot up, it seems. So Pretty cool. In the sideboard, we've got Rekindling Phoenix because this is a really good card to throw down as a blocker and such. And it's also a good way to just push tempo. You can block so many things, it's ridiculous. But then once you finally turn the corner, you can start attacking with it, and you can really put your opponent at a bad offset just because they have to block it. Otherwise, they're taking 4 to the face, and they're not going to like taking 4 to the face when you've got 4 risk factors. So Vance's Blasting Cannons over additional copies of Experimental Fury here, and I think that that's a really good play. Vance's Blasting Cannons is a terrific card, and if you're just needing a little bit more card advantage, this is going to guarantee you at least 1 card per turn, and then of course if you ever do flip it, lightning bolts per turn for the end of the game. We do have lava coils and fight with fire here, so when the deck does get a little bit bigger, he's got an additional land to bring in. And then as far as his mana base goes, it's 100% just straight up 20 islands. Let's go. I must say that this is a Flame of the Keld deck, and this deck could be absolutely devastating using cards like Runaway Steamkin to allow you to truly go off on your Flame of the Keld turn. So I really, really like this take on mono red. It is a mono red deck that is low to the ground, very aggressive, but it's burn. And if any of you guys like modern burn, then come play in standard. We've got a burn deck for you. All right, next here we've got Mono Red Goblins. Now, this one is not exactly like your burn deck. This is absolutely like the Goblins deck I showed you a few days ago, or last week, however you want to look at it. Skirk Prospector being a card that can allow you to ramp into a turn 2 Legion War Boss, which will then start giving you more and more and more goblins. And then once you start getting a ton of goblins, you can use cards like Volley Veteran to kill creatures based on the number of goblins you have. There are Goblin Crater Makers that, a lot of times I'm reading this card off going, okay, well, what is a colorless non-land permanent that we might be able to kill that's not an artifact? Karn. It will kill Karn. So that's a thing. We have seen more Karns get played than we've been seeing in the past. Crater Maker does kill those Karns. You can go wide with your Goblins. Very easy in this deck with Goblin Instigator and Legion War Boss. And then, of course, you can start turning those goblins into cannonballs with the Siege Gang Commander. So, straight up, I really do like this deck, and it's really low to the ground, which makes Experimental Frenzy a great card, even in the main board. Now, in the sideboard, we are seeing more copies of Rekindling Phoenix, which seems to be pretty straightforward for these mono red decks, even the red splash something else decks. More Experimental Frenzy, Banefire, because, who doesn't want to Banefire someone? Has that meme set in yet? You guys getting that? All right. Lava Coil here to be able to deal with Shalai and other large creatures. If mono green does continue to be a thing, then you're going to need to be able to deal with Still Leaf Champion and cards of that nature. And Lava Coil is exactly where you want to be. Also, if Mentor starts getting out of hand on you a little bit, you'll need something the likes of Lava Coil to be able to catch back up. So I do like the 4 copies of Lava Coil here. All right, moving on to our next mono red deck. That's right, guys. There's mono red burn, there is mono red goblins, and then there is mono red mid range. Who said red deck was dead? Huh? This deck is running 4 full copies of Experimental Frenzy. Hit an Experimental Frenzy and then just play off the top from there. Get 2 Lava Runner, Sheevan Fire, and Shock as 1-drops. Dismissive Pyromancer as a 4 of in this deck, along with Lava Coil. Seems like this could be a roadblock with an Experimental Frenzy against certain decks. However, it may have been a thing that he just didn't come up against those particular decks, or maybe he just killed one of his own goblins or something. I don't know, but if you hit a Lava Coil against a control deck and there's no creatures on the battlefield, you're not going any further with your Experimental Frenzy that turn, which could become a problem. I don't know how much I like that, and the more our meta shifts into control, which I think it is doing. In that we're currently in the middle of it trying to shift into a control or maybe even mid-range status. I think these lava coils might get worse and worse depending on how much control does start to develop, but we'll see. There is also 4 copies of Treasure Map here to keep you going, keep you drawing cards, and to give you enough mana along with your Runaway Steamkin to cast multiple cards off the top of your library using your Experimental Frenzy. Now the deck is running 22 lands and it has 3 additional copies of Mountain in the sideboard. So it can go up to 23 land, which will make it much easier for you to get to, a kicked fight with fire, or just get your Siege Gang Commander down with enough mana to actually start throwing your goblins at people. No Legion Warboss or anything like that here, but Siege Gang Commander and Goblin Chain Whirler seem to be enough for the Goblin package in this deck. Now we're going to move to our last monocolor deck here, and this is Mono White, or White Weenie, as a lot of people have grown used to calling it. I personally am not a fan of the White Weenie decks, but this Mono White Knights or Mono White, Mono White. It's just Mono White. We've got Legion's Landing. We've got Sky Marcher Aspirant. Those are vampires. You've got your Haunted Witness, which is a human that will give you a 1/1 white soldier when it dies. Dauntless Bodyguard, which is a knight, so it will actually benefit from History of Benalia. We have Adanto Vanguard, which is a vampire soldier. And then, of course, once you get these down, then you can cast your Venerated Loxodon, making your guys even bigger, and then continue to go wide with the History of Benalias and things of that nature, making your creatures larger with Benalish Marshal and your Venerated Loxodon, and then of course hit a Pride of Conqueror and then just run over your opponent. And that's kind of the idea here. The deck does have the ability to go bigger in the sideboard. Again, we're seeing a land in the sideboard. Sideboarding in a land seems like that would be just a little bit crazy. I think it's a great tactic when you're running under 24 lands, but I mean, you do need to be increasing your curve before you're going to side in a land. It's kind of new to see lands taking the spot in a sideboard. We have seen that in the past on occasion, but we're starting to see a lot of it here in the in Guilds of Ravnica, which could mean that the strategy of being fast and aggressive in game 1 and then slowing your game plan down because you expect your opponents to have more answers for your game plan, that could be a very solid strategy, and it looks like that multiple people are taking that, and that's why we're finding these lands in the sideboard. Now 3 copies of Lyra, some Citywide Bust, Baffling End, Sorcerer's Spyglass, and Settle the Wreckage are kind of what make up the sideboard here. So alright, moving on. We've got Naya Dinosaurs for you guys. Naya Dinosaurs, we all kind of knew this deck was coming. It's not just dinosaurs. There are Kavu and elves in this deck as well. We've got Llanowar Elves into Stillleaf Champion as one of the still the most backbreaking 2-drops that you can do. Yes, I know it's a 3-drop, but when you Llanowar Elves on 1, it's a 2-drop. So burn the elf, burn the elf, bolt the bird, burn the elf. Llanowar Elves allowing you to just quickly get down a really big guy. Once you get your dinosaurs down, like your Thrashing Brontodons, your Territorial Allosaurs, Ripjaw Raptors, or possibly even your Charging Monstrosaur. That's right, guys. 4 copies of Charging Monstrosaur in this deck, along with Untamed Kavu. Wait till this deck gets the proper mana to be able to do some crazy things. Now, this deck also has the ability to use both sides of Deafening Clarion and use the hidden mode, draw a card, right? That's right. With Ripjaw Raptor and you cast Deafening Clarion, you're going to be able to do 3 damage to your Ripjaw Raptor, 3 damage to everything else on the board, but Ripjaw Raptor is also going to be able to get a lifelink. So when it swings, And if they happen to have something left to block it with, you'll get another trigger on your Ripjaw Raptor. So Deafening Clarion with Ripjaw Raptor seems absolutely terrific. You'll notice that this is for more or less a mono green deck, splashing white, splashing red, so that it can get a couple extra utility spells like Deafening Clarion and Dawn of Hope. So I really do like this deck. 4 copies of Carnage Tyrant, and 1 Banefire, because who doesn't want to Banefire someone? And then Vivian Reed, Dryad Greenseeker in the sideboard is one that kind of gotten me. I guess it's just there against aggressive decks. You throw down this 1/3, and then you just kind of sit back and go, okay, we're not far from me hitting a really big dude, and then I just don't have to worry about you. So maybe that's the point of the 1/3. I don't know. Anyway, let's move on to our Orzhov aggro, the black-white aggro deck. Now, at first I was looking at this like, holy cow, how many different lords do they have in this deck? We've got a Vampire Lord here, which will make your Sky Marcher Aspirant and your Adanto Vanguard a little bit bigger. It also makes other Legion Lieutenants a little bit bigger. Now, even though the Sky Marcher Aspirant and the Adanto Vanguard are not knights, they're soldiers, so it doesn't work really, really well with Valiant Knight, but just in case you guys didn't notice it, Legion Lieutenant's a knight. This is a Vampire Knight, so even Legion Lieutenant, which could be a terrific card to pair with your other early drops, will get a benefit from History of Benalia. Not bad, not bad. Along with Benalish Marshal, which we all know as a knight, and gives all your other creatures +1/+1. So I like where this deck is going, even though it looks like it might be a little scatterbrained. It's not. The Vampire Knight is actually relevant in this deck in multiple ways. I think it's very, very clever, and definitely got a chuckle out of this deck. And it could actually be really, really good. It was good enough to take this pilot to a 5-0. So, congratulations to him for running what doesn't look like jank, but secretly is. Maybe it's just good deck building, right? And then we've got a couple angels, a Johnny in the sideboard, and Settle the Wreckage along with Citywide Bust for some absolute wipe. Then if you need to make some more vampires with your Legion's Landing, which is probably perfect with the lords that are main board. I don't think that you want to go the lord route if you're against something that can just pick apart your creatures. You probably want to go the lord route with something else that's playing a ton of creatures. Kite Self Rebooter to be able to just grab things out of their hand. Not a knight, not a vampire, but Kite Self Rebooter nonetheless. Okay, guys, we've got Selesnya and then a Sultai deck. So this first one here is Selesnya mid-range. Now, all of these Selesnya decks are quite different. This first one being Selesnya mid-range, pretty cool. We're seeing the Harpooner show up again. The card's not bad, and if you do have some creatures already in your graveyard, you're going to be able to really do some damage with the Harpooner. Whenever Cruel Harpooner enters the battlefield, choose up to 1 target creature with flying you don't control. A lot of people are playing angels and things like that, so the Harpooner is just an absolutely terrific way to kill angels, but you do need creatures in the graveyard before you're going to be able to do that. And for the Harpooner, you're going to need at least 1 creature in the graveyard to kill a Shala. You're going to need 2 creatures in the graveyard to be able to kill Lyra. So I do want to point out that during a fight, not combat damage, but during a fight, keywords like First Strike, Vigilance, things like that, they do not matter. Reach does not matter. Things like that just don't matter in those particular situations. But Cruel Harpooner will get that buff based on the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and then you may have it fight, that creature. So that's pretty cool. Baffling In along with Thorn Lieutenant. Thorn Lieutenant is just no stranger here in the green-white decks. Autumn Night, one of the best green-white cards that came out of this set. pairs well with History of Naya, which, again, we're seeing no shortage of History of Nayas being played, no shortage of Shalahs or Lyras. Looks like Shalah and Lyra definitely going to be, one of the pillars of our format for the remainder of the season. Now, the deck does run a couple copies of Ajani in both the main board and the sideboard here. We've got Vivian Reed's additional copies of Lyra and Shalah, along with Knight of Grace, which, again, I was telling you guys earlier that if you're playing against one of the Golgari decks, there are almost no ways in the entire deck that they can kill the Knight of Grace other than combat damage. So as long as you're careful with how you use your Knight of Grace, it'll probably stick around and be on the battlefield for the entire game. Pretty cool. Other than Ritual of Soot, there's just nothing those decks can do about it. All right, moving on to the Selesnya Stompy deck. Well, last week we seen a Selesnya Stompy deck that was mainly mono green, but just kind of splashed white. Here we've actually got a mono green. Well, we've got a green white deck. This one's not mono green splashing white. We're actually getting some good use out of this. And this deck is another one of those decks that can turn for a Galta. We've got 3 copies of Galta, and that's kind of the major point here. You just want to get this Venerated Loxodon down as early as possible, because that's going to be 4 power all by itself. You're going to be able to, to put some additional +1/+1 counters, or kind of anthem up all of your other small creatures that you put down before it, or your fairly beefy creatures like your Steel Leaf Champion. Get that Venerated Loxodon down on turn 3, and then you're easy into a turn 4 Galta. So not bad, not bad. And that's pretty much the gist of this deck. You want to do that. You want to get that Pell Collector larger. You want to get your Thorn Lieutenants or your Amaras out. Getting more power onto the battlefield is going to mean and going wider is going to mean it's going to be even cheaper for you to cast your Venerated Loxodon. And then from there, it's just almost free to get that Galta down. 2 mana Galta is where you want to be. But if you did have to pay 3 or 4 for a Galta, it's probably not bad either. Now, in the sideboard, we've got more Lyra Dawnbringers, we got more Shalah. Dawn of Hope seems to be in a lot of these. It seems to be a really good card. Just getting it down, you can start using your mana. It's a great late game mana sink. And then, of course, if you are drawing some life, which the tokens that it creates do have life link. So if you're drawing some life, you can start drawing some cards. And if you're gaining life, you can draw some cards. So pretty cool there. Shaper's Sanctuary, Thrashing Brontodon, that sort of thing. We see it that they're not common in all of the sideboards, but they're pretty decent cards, and I can see why someone would want those. If you think that there's going to be a lot of targeted removal, then Shaper Sanctuary is going to be absolutely terrific. Okay, moving on to Selesnya tokens. Now, this one is the only Selesnya deck running March of the Multitudes and Flower. Last meta coverage video, we had a lot of March of Multitudes and things like that. It looks like the Ritual of Soot and things has just been able to deal with those. Remember, tokens have 0 converted mana cost, so all tokens are dealt with by Ritual of Soot, no matter how large they are. And then, of course, most of this deck can be dealt with by Ritual of Soot, as it's going to destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less, whether or not your opponent has hexproof. It just does not care. So we're looking at most of this deck getting wiped out by Ritual of Soot without you having to target anything. So again, you want to get as many creatures down as possible. Get that Verdant Lexodon down, which will then give you a ton of power onto the battlefield. And then, of course, using your Convoke abilities to tap your Amara when you can't get through with Amara, so that you can make even more dudes, so that you can Anthem even more with your Venerated Loxodon. The deck actually puts a ton of power onto the battlefield very, very quick, and then you can use all of that to get in some major March of the Multitudes. And then, that's pretty much it. If you do get a Shalah down, you can just start using your mana to pump with Shala. In the sideboard, we're seeing, Knight of Autumn, which is perfect for those artifacts and enchantments. But then again, if you need to have a creature, this can provide you a ton of life against aggressive decks by gaining 4 life when it enters the battlefield, and then stopping ever how much life it stops by blocking. So just an absolute powerhouse here in Knight of Autumn. We're seeing it in almost all the decks that can run it. We're seeing decks actually splash green just to run it. So Black White Knights, I think that green, this is one of the main reasons to be in green. So that's why we're seeing Abzan Knights, and it's terrific. Vinemayer here, being able to swing through most of the Golgari decks. We may start to see more copies of Vinemayer show up. I would expect that over the course of the next week or so. Of course, Lyra Dawnbringer showing up again. Dawn of Hope. Looks like Dawn of Hope is the real deal, and we're going to be seeing that in a lot of sideboards as well, just as some additional life gain and card draw. So I love the late game mana sink here in Dawn of Hope. And then of course Vivian Reed being able to deal with flying Lyra Dawnbringers, opposing Lyra Dawnbringers, could make Vivian Reed one of the best planeswalkers we currently have access to. So just depending on the meta, but we are seeing a ton of Shalas and Lyra Dawnbringers, and Vivian deals with those. So pretty awesome. I do want to say that, and I mentioned it earlier, this is the only deck that 5-0'd that was running Flower, but Flower's going to be able to give you that overrun ability. Well, not overrun, just +2/+2 until end of turn. So if you don't need the mana, you can always use it as a pump spell. And then last but not least here, we've got a Sultai mid-range deck. This is one of the few decks that was running 4 copies of Assassin's Trophy. It's also running 3 mainboard copies of Ritual of Soot, 4 Doom Whisperer, and Notion Rain. Not a lot of life gain here. So, if you are using, your life for Notion Rains and Doom Whisperer triggers, you're really going to want to be very specific with your Death Gorge Scavenger triggers to make sure that you are gaining some life back. Do keep in mind that this is your only real life gain in the deck. So, be liberal with eating those creatures out of the graveyard. I know that sometimes you're just going to want that extra point of damage, but it may be important to just go ahead and eat a creature out of the graveyard so that you can gain a little bit of life. Now, Eldest Reborn and Vraska's Relic Seeker, these are just like the perfect turn 5 and turn 6 after you have cast a Ritual of Soot, and then of course if your opponent didn't play anything the turn after Ritual of Soot, you'll want to just follow up with your Doom Whisper and kind of move on from there. Pretty straightforward. Merfolk Branchwalker and cards like that are seeing some play in about all of these decks. This is a lot like the Golgari decks. However, it has the Notion Rain ability, and in the sideboard we'll see some use for blue with Negate and Disdainful Stroke. Carnage Tyrant, more Soots, Moment of Cravings and Duress. But basically the only reason this deck is blue is to be able to use Notion Rain, Disdainful Stroke, and Negate. So Golgari splash blue for Negate. Maybe that may be where these end up going. Negate seems like it's going to be great at helping them deal with, Settle the Wreckages and, Teferis and things like that. So, all right, guys, that is going to be your meta coverage. I tried to go through it much faster this time. I hope you guys enjoy. My name's Eric. You've been watching Sideboard MTG. Don't forget that if you want to play any of these decks, Mana Traders has got you covered. They will help you be a better Magic player by just allowing you to rent and use all the cards from Guild, from all of Standard, Modern, anything you want to do. If you do decide to sign up, save yourself a buck and help out the channel by using the link in the description box below. And even if you don't help out the channel by using the link, save yourself a buck and use the coupon code anyway. Sideboard MTG White, no spaces, is the code for this month. I think that for the next few days we still have Sideboard MTG Green, so if you guys want to do that, and then I'm sure next month we're going to have like red, black, or blue or something like that, but we'll see. Anyway, Sideboard MTG White is your 15% off your first 3 months when you sign up for Mana Traders. It's a great service. They do have GRN cards now, so Guilds of Ravnica is starting to come in. You can rent those now, so they are online and on board. Do expect shortages until the 7th, which is 2 days from now. So go ahead, get signed up, get your cards, get to playing, get to practicing, know what you want to buy or rent in paper for your F&M. Guys, my name's Eric. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had fun. We'll see you next time.